In this episode, I'm chatting to Elliot and James from Elliot Lee Estate Agents. They're a company that I've seen grow over the years, and they've gone from old school to high tech, and I want to talk to them about some of the differences that has made to their business. James, Elliot, thanks for coming in today. What I wanted to try to dig into today, I've known you guys for quite a long time and I've seen quite a big transformation in the way that you guys work. And often I speak to agents who have worked the same way for as long as their business has existed. Sometimes that can be 20, 30 years in some cases. So I just wanted to try to really explore the feelings that you guys have around innovating the way you work, some of the results that you've had. And the place I wanted to start with it really was somewhere that I know has made a big difference in your business, and we might go off onto different tangents. And that was around removing the amount of phone calls that were coming in from tenant inquiries and buyer inquiries. If I was just to have that conversation, even with maybe, your company 5 years ago, let's just say, agents get quite protective about that conversation because I think that's a massive part of their job. It fills up a lot of their day. And so the idea of taking it away not only has a benefit to it in the sense of wow, that'd be great if we didn't have to do that work, but I think they also immediately feel a bit more like, well, isn't that what we're supposed to be doing? So can you just maybe talk the listeners through how that used to work and maybe how it works now, and the process of how you got there and the benefits of it maybe? I don't know if you want to start with that.
Yeah, so it used to work that we'd have 10 lines coming through, call after call, negotiators picking up calls, trying to deal with the clients, trying to not let the phone ring more than 2 or 3 times. God.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, previously I've been working Saturdays, you tend to have, streamline your staff on a Saturdays. I remember going back, years ago, I remember having 3 phones on my desk. I'd have answering one, have one on hold, answer the next, trying to register people.
Because it's a busy part of London as well, right?
Yeah, we deal with high volume. We've always dealt with high volume of calls. So, having to go through registration process, you want to get the information correct as well. So it's not a 30-second call. It's quite a long conversation, but you're not actually having the conversation you want because you're trying to get onto that next call. So by structuring how we've structured it now, takes that away completely. The phone hardly rings. Okay,
but before we get to that, if we go back to that idea, 3 phones on the desk, you're busy. I can imagine at the time it was this is it. This is a estate agency. If you can't deal with it, don't work here. Did you have that feeling, or was you always from the beginning
The focus used to be on how quickly you could answer the phone, and if you'd answered the phone the quickest, rather than the outcome of that conversation.
Yeah.
And how many calls you'd answered?
How many calls you answered. We used to monitor how long you were on the phone, how quickly you answered, how many calls you answered.
And celebrate that stuff, right?
And that's what we used to celebrate. And the problem with that is that as the calls kept coming in, we could only let and sell so many properties, and calls were coming in more and more and more, where we were having to get more people into the office to answer phone calls and actually not utilising the staff that we had in the office.
At the time, did that feel like growth though? Wow, look at this, we need more people now just to answer the phone calls.
I think to start with, it felt like we were a really busy agency.
I'd say so.
But over a period of time, it starts to drain on you that you can't do the job or the things that you want to do. So you have a conversation in the morning, we'll get this done, and by the end of the day, every day, you get to the end of the day, that's been another busy one. Where you've not been able to have the calls or make the calls out that you wanted to do, or have a conversation with someone that you wanted to do, and everything was rushed.
Right.
So I'm trying to have a conversation with you, and in the back of my mind, I can see that phone ringing.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, who's on that phone? And I'm trying to end the conversation quicker than maybe I'd like to.
Yeah, and I suppose back then that was probably all, I don't know, I'm just guessing, but maybe that was all part of the training as well. Someone comes on board, do not let that phone ring more than 2 times. It's like the highest priority, above customer service, above letting properties, above,
It still causes us anxiety as we're talking about it now, because I think both of us are a bit like, when that phone's ringing, it's like, pick it up. So I think it's ingrained in you, if you've been doing the job for a while, that that phone needs to be answered.
And of course, no one would say oh, who cares? You know, let's have a company whereby the phone just rings and rings and rings. So we're not saying that, but that, am I right in saying that that was a huge part of the whole core of what the company did every day was literally, we need to answer these phone calls?
100%.
The traditional stuff where, you know, you're registering people, you're getting the feedback, you're updating your vendors, you're, you know, calling through tenants, your client lists. It was just, it was unachievable to get through those lists of what you wanted to get through every day and take the calls from the tenants and buyers and register them in detail.
Yeah,
it's
and
just
do
impossible.
the viewings and do the valuations.
With the number of staff that you had.
Yeah.
And the problem was when you start ringing out, people start ringing back. So you had that whole thing going on as well. So not only did you have inquiries, you had people calling you back that you then couldn't answer because of the volume of calls, or were trying to answer in a hurry.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I often look at a estate agency and think like one of the core fundamental problems for many small estate agencies is that you can't charge enough to employ the amount of people you would need in order to give a phenomenal service.
Yeah, 100%.
And it feels like that loop was what you started to realise as you started to grow. Was like, it doesn't matter what we do here,
It's going to make a difference.
we're not going to be able to give the service we want.
Yeah.
Now, the idea of answering the call in 2 rings fundamentally is about good customer service, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So even if you are answering the calls in two rings, but you're not giving good customer service to everyone, then I guess you go to sleep unhappy.
Yeah.
So where's the point then where it suddenly dawns on you two and you start having conversations where you're thinking, how are we going to solve this?
I think we've always embraced technology generally, and I think, you know, rather than solving the problem of the phones, we just knew that we couldn't carry on the way we were carrying on. And obviously, in terms of advertising, a company came across that had a proposition to deal with calls slightly differently. And me and James sat down and had a conversation about how that may look. And we probably didn't agree on how that may look. And I think there's a lot of people in the industry that may not agree on how that may look. But over a period of time, we've refined that process and continue to refine that process where we're not exactly where we want to be, but we've certainly got more time on the front end to make the calls and do the things that we want to do because we're making those changes. So I think it's been a gradual thing, and it is a gradual thing.
Yeah.
And it's educating the public, because to start with, when we embraced with technology and came away from answering the phones immediately, there wasn't a great deal that went back to the public, so they would wonder why they necessarily had the call answered straight away.
Yeah.
And over a period of time, we've improved that process and continue to improve that process. And yeah, it's been a gradual. I think it's been a gradual thing.
You think back to when we first started looking at the calls coming in with the registrations. One of the first steps we took was to create a form in a link that we used to send to people and say, you need to complete this, as opposed to taking it down over the phone.
Yeah.
And they would fill it out, it would come back to us, and then we'd have to manually enter it into our system.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like, we knew we'd love to have automated that, and that's obviously when we spoke with you guys, but that was one step where it took out some of that kind of necessity to be on the phone for so long, registering details that, you know, you didn't need to be on the phone. We had one of our apprentices, that was one of their jobs every day, was to put the details from the forms into our CRM system.
Yeah. And so if I was to play devil's advocate with that, I mean, obviously, you know, I'm a believer in that. We have a software that does it, but if I was to play devil's advocate with some of the conversations that I've had in the past with agents, what would you say for an agent that's going, why would I want to do that? Why would I not want to have conversations with people? You know, I'm going to miss all these opportunities. My staff are supposed to be, you know, building rapport with all these people.
But you call them back.
Yeah.
You call them back and have that so that time you would have spent registering them, you're now having a conversation, talking to them about their property needs, as opposed to getting their email address wrong and sending them the wrong email. And
the benefit being that you can be more selective.
Yeah,
like,
100%. Yeah.
100%. And then the other thing is that, I mean, the forms that come from Lifecycle allow us to segment those calls anyway. So when we hear the calls coming in, we still know the calls are coming in and the inquiries hit our database, and then we can call those people back and make sure that we communicate with the right people rather than potentially the wrong people. So yes, we understand that you might lose that one person that wanted to phone up and speak to somebody, but the technology allows us to know who's called in and we then deal with those appropriately.
Yeah. So let's just walk someone through it in brief, if you like, the process that happens now. I make an inquiry, whether it be lettings or sales. You know, I make an inquiry by phone or email. I guess are the two main ways. what would happen if I was a tenant or a buyer?
So if you're coming in through the email route, and we'd expect that probably to come through either on Rightmove, Zoopla, or maybe directly from the website on a lifecycle form, there's an automation that goes back to them that says, thank you for your inquiry. Before we can take this any further, we need you to be fully registered within our system, create your heads up alert, and tell them the benefits of it. We can't do anything until you've done that. And we won't even call them until we can see they've done that. And we can resend it if we need to, but then they fill out their registration, it comes up on our system, this person's now registered. So we now then call them back and say, thanks for doing that, now let's get to work.
Yeah.
So that's something, and it's similar on the phone. We use WhatsApp, as you know, and love that. If somebody calls up and says, I want to see the 3-bedroom house I've seen on the market for lettings or for sale, it'll be okay, great. What I'm going to do first of all is just send you a link on WhatsApp. You just need to complete that for me. Once you've completed that, just drop me a message back to say you're done. I'll call you back and we'll get you.
And they get that message automated when they phone to start with, don't they?
Yeah, so in terms of when they call into the office, there's certain selections they can make. Most of them go through to a process where it's either a voicemail or a form or a WhatsApp. So they can't really get past that.
Yeah.
There's only one way they can get past that, but everybody knows now if anybody calls that one particular option, they do not speak to them. It's a valuations line, basically. They don't speak to them. You've come through to the valuations office. You need to redial, press the correct option.
Awesome. So what if they've already registered? Do they still get that message, or how do they get past that idea that, like, they're stuck? I've already done this. I've already registered.
So we use then direct lines.
Okay,
so
perfect.
Once you become a client, once you're kind of in the circle, you can now get straight through to the person you're dealing with. So
Brilliant.
Because deep down we service people, so we want to make sure that people get the right service.
I love it. So for an agent that's listening to that thinking, that sounds like a dream, but like I'm a bit worried that it could have a negative impact. Does anyone ever eventually get through to you and go, this is all annoying?
Yeah.
And how do you deal with, what's made you not crumble around someone doing that? Obviously it can't have been that bad, I guess. I don't know.
No. You look at the numbers of the people that we register and the number of people that come back to and say, cool. It's only because they want to speak to somebody. They don't want to have to fill a form out. It's like, well, I don't want to speak to you until you fill that form out. So, we're the ones taking you around the property. It's our time. So do it on our terms. If you don't want to do that, don't deal with us.
The system lets us know that they've called. It's down to us internally to make sure that we go back to that person quicker. So we've improved that internally to make sure that if someone has inquired, that we go back within a certain time frame so that it's responded to. Otherwise, they may try and get in a couple of times, which can be quite frustrating. But. Yeah,
it's interesting because I remember a year or two ago, maybe even probably a couple of years ago, I'd say. This property came through on this Rightmove alert that I've got set up. And I wasn't actively looking to buy a property, but I'm always sort of browsing. And I thought, that's quite nice. And they had some sort of automated kickback form when I made the inquiry saying, you fill all this out. And I thought, I can't be bothered to do that. And I questioned myself for a minute, because I thought to myself, that's interesting. I've been telling agents that, like, if they can't be bothered to fill out a form, they're not worth dealing with. And here am I not filling out a form. And then I thought, actually, I'm one of them people that's not worth dealing with.
Yeah.
Like there was literally no possibility that I was going to buy this house.
Yeah.
And I know it might seem strange, like, well, why would you go and view it? It's just, I don't know, it was quite nice. And all right, maybe there's a 10% possibility that I would have bought the house, but I wasn't looking, I had no finance in place, I hadn't spoken to my family about it. Like, I'm way down the list of people that might buy this house. And the fact I couldn't be bothered to fill out the form, if for some reason the agent had decided to then phone me because he had fear of missing out, I probably would have said to him, like, oh, I got the form, like, that was annoying. But it's annoying because you're not that serious. Yeah. Flip it around, if I was dead serious about that house, I'd have filled that form out within about 3 minutes.
Exactly.
There was nothing too painful on it.
Yeah, I think, we've always that mindset. You've got to answer every call, go back to everybody, deal with every single lead. I think, we've just come out of a market for sales where, there was too many buyers. You didn't need to, if you didn't want to fill the form out, no problem. I've got another, dozen buyers that want to buy it. I think in a tougher market, we may change that strategy slightly, maybe. I don't know. Again, same with lettings at the moment. We've got, for every property that comes on, there's 50 tenants straight away inquiring. And if you don't want to fill the form out, no problem. It doesn't bother me.
So what about the guilt side of it? Like, as a business owner, I don't know how to word this, like, in some of the first businesses that I had, they were very much based around the traditional ideas of like cold calling and getting in early and being there for the morning meetings and working late and just putting in the effort. Mm-hmm. And as I slowly in my career started to discover the idea of working smarter, there's also an element of guilt that goes with that, you know, especially when you do hit a slower market, for instance. And you know that there's nothing that can be done about this, but the fact that you're not pounding the streets and pounding the phones can often sometimes leave you a little bit like, I have to justify
100%.
to people like why, why we do it. So how do you deal with that side of it? Like, do you find yourself, as you nearly went on to say there, in a tougher market, would you find yourself creeping back into it just because, well, I've got to do something?
I think you tweak it. I think for me personally, there is definitely guilt with the whole kind of not being on the phones and not answering that call. We, on the way up here, I think one of the things we spoke about was, we worked in the industry where you answer the phone. So to come away from that and change your mentality is hard. I think that was our biggest challenge. But you don't have to go back. You can tweak it slightly to adjust rather as opposed to go back to where you were. And I think if when we have properties that are maybe struggling a little bit for whatever reason, we've got the technology now within Lifecycle where we can go, okay, you don't have to call through everybody. Just see how to look at it in the last few days. Like, be clever with it. You don't need to call through 100 people every time. Just call through the half a dozen people that you think might want to go and have a look at it. And you can be, you can have a little bit of salesmanship there where maybe they don't want to see it, but let's keep that vendor happy. Let's get a couple of people through the door. You never know, they might do.
We're always discussing that, aren't we? We're always looking at ways to improve, make sure that we've got engagement with our clients. But I think that there's so many benefits to making sure that this works longer term that going back is just not an option for us. But we will, as the market changes, we will tweak.
It was the part of the job I really came to detest was registering people.
Yeah.
I used to find it so boring and wasting. I felt like I was wasting. It's like being stuck in a traffic jam. I was like,
yeah, because for them it's like it's just one call, isn't it? For you, it's like the 100th of the day of the person.
There's a consistency as well with it. Is that in the old days you'd have a card and every card would be different. You might put a squiggle on it or whatever. That's how you knew what that was, but someone else would know what it is. Now everything's consistent. So you start to work as a team. You start to process things better.
Yeah, and it is ingrained now. Everybody's like, they don't know any other way of working. Like that's how you do things, right? That's how you register people.
Crazy. Imagine if they just upped and then got a job in another estate agents. They'd be like,
shocked.
What
but we always say,
going on?
We always say to them, you don't know how lucky you've got it. When we were doing it, it's like, you sound like your dad.
I think the things that we did X, Y, and Z, and now they've got a structure. They know what they're doing. They're adding value. And when I say we take on quite young staff, apprentices that come on. We train them, and they become a real asset to the business.
And how's that process different from? Obviously you're not saying to them anymore like it's not being drilled into them about the volume of you've got to answer the calls in. Well, I'm sure you still have that, but like not to the same. Not where that's what they're going to do every day. So what are they being told to do now?
To be aware, just to be aware of what's coming in. If someone has called in quick succession, because it will tell us, just to be aware that person's trying to get hold of us and to make sure that we potentially call that person back.
Yeah.
Not just to sit there and just let that person come in again and again and again. So
pay attention, basically.
Pay attention and still care about what it is you're doing, not just sit there and go.
That phone's ringing. I haven't got to answer it. But like I said, we've got a valuations line on the options. When that valuation line goes, they know that gets picked up. Whatever you're doing, that gets picked up within that 2-3 rings.
Yeah,
has to.
Yeah.
Because if it doesn't, it goes through to my voicemail. And if I get a voicemail with a valuation on it, I'm like, well, why have I got?
So we know that's coming in. It'll be answered. So the business isn't affected.
Yeah. Absolutely.
One of the biggest things we have is when we have a meeting. Like sometimes we can call a meeting where before the phones would just be ringing off the hook and you just couldn't concentrate. Where now we can actually take 20 minutes out and say, right, come on. What's going on, and that really helps, because before, as much we sit there having a conversation and the phones be going, I'm like, okay, pick those calls up. It does allow you to stop and go, right.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I came to your office a little while ago and I remember like it was just whoa,
it's quiet.
We sat and spoke about stuff in the main office. It was just crazy.
Yeah.
So let's move on to that then. Like, you go through all of that process. And then what's the benefits that sit out the other side of that? Why is that so beneficial, doing all of that sort of stuff?
Well, for us, we're hoping that the benefits are going to come on the social media side. We've find social media a little bit more difficult than most maybe. But we want to spend some real time trying to grow the company and personal brands. And by not answering the phones 24/7 and having those under control, we're hoping that we can get out in the community more and do some of the things that people are telling us that we should be doing. But in reality, when the phone's ringing all the time, you just don't have time to do it.
Yeah.
So it has taken us a while to implement some of these changes, but we're hoping that those changes will allow us to do more stuff digitally.
Yeah.
We still make certain calls. We still work a bit of old school, a bit of new school. But yeah, we're hoping that it gives us more time to be more proactive on digital platforms and create more content.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because, you know, when I talked to Rob about some of the coaching calls that he has with people, and even, you know, when I talk to agents, it always makes sense to people. You know, they always go, yeah, this will be brilliant. And then it's just a question of finding the time to actually implement any of that stuff, isn't it?
I think it goes back to the guilt conversation. At the minute, we're probably coming out from being efficient. We're still making some of the calls maybe that we shouldn't be. And it's the guilt of us saying, well, you know what, let's spend half a day coming here or half a day producing a video. Let's do some things that are going to benefit the company whilst we're sleeping effectively.
Yeah.
And that's the bit, in terms of guilt, that it's taken us time to change, but we've seen shooting sprouts from the calls, and that's the way we want to continue.
It does give you more time to think about things from a more strategic point of view as well, like as opposed to, we've got half an hour, let's go and do, you know, a leaflet drop, or let's go and talk about, you know, it gives you more time to sit down and go, okay, let's throw some ideas around, let's plan this out, blueprint it, and actually allocate some time to go and do that. Whereas before, you just did not have the time.
Yeah.
Just didn't have the time.
Do you find that it snowballs in the sense that I can imagine an agent sort of thinks, right, okay, we've worked this way for 15 years, but I've been listening to some podcasts and I've looked up some stuff online, and I think we should start trying to make some changes. And maybe they try and make a change, and maybe it doesn't go brilliantly for them straight away, and so they sort of just default back to like, right, you know, fuck all that. Let's go back to what we were doing before. Mm-hmm. As you start to get some benefits from some of the stuff, do you find it snowballs into like more conversations about what else could we potentially do?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. We're quite excitable characters, and we're quite excited about estate agency. There's just a lot to do.
Yeah.
But it's different stuff that we've got to learn, things that are probably outside our comfort zone. But it's exciting because we know where we can go to potentially. So yeah, it does snowball, and you have to be careful with that as well, that you don't start putting loads of technology in, because sometimes it's not needed or it doubles up on certain things.
It's not just technology, you know, it could be anything, couldn't it? It could just be like, you know, wow, we've never even thought about the fact that we don't necessarily need to have, I don't know, that conversation anymore. Or why are we still doing this thing that we're all just... I was talking about it the other day with somebody when they were talking about descriptions on properties. And they've been an estate agent for about 15, 16 years, which takes us back to, 2008-ish. Now, I was an estate agent in like mid-90s, and we were just talking about descriptions, and they were laughing, or they don't do all these descriptions anymore, they just do a summary and blah, 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 blah. And I was thinking about it, and I was saying, like, you know what, it's crazy, because descriptions, when I think about it, they came out of the idea of, when I was an estate agent, there was only one photo. Like, there was one photo on the front of the page, and then the rest was just verbally, you're just describing it, which is almost impossible to imagine in today's world, isn't it? And it just carried on to the point whereby there are still lots of estate agents that are still writing
full descriptions,
roll edge work surface and window to side, and there's photos. It's like, and there's even a video. Like, it's crazy. So some things, like, people, you just carry on forever, and if you get the chance to think, you can quite often just solve something that's been a massive problem in the company by literally going, why do we even say that anymore?
And you find yourself doing things where you go, why am I doing this? Like we had a conversation this week where we're trying to look at ways of reaching out to our landlords clients that we haven't dealt with or spoken to for a long time. One of the things we put a plan in place how we're going to do it, and one of the things we spoke about was when we speak to these guys is putting their properties in as market appraisals within life cycle. And in an ideal world, great, but I said, you know, we kind of discussed it. We don't get anything from that. We can put it in, but what's it going to give us? We're dealing with a contact as opposed to a property, so we just need him.
Yeah.
Why waste time putting in hundreds of properties?
You have to check in with yourself again and just actually just go through it. Why are we doing it? It feels right because we'll have 1,000 more properties sitting on the system we know about, but
no reason.
But exactly the same number of landlords.
Exactly, and in reality, that's not the way to go. So sometimes you have to check in with yourself and just make sure.
It's probably, like you say, it's probably a carryover from a time whereby, like, well, that was all that the system ever did. We're not putting a property in, there's no point putting anything in there.
Yeah.
Whereas now, like, maybe you've got a system whereby, like, well, there's a reason for just having a person in there as a landlord.
Well, I think
you'll be communicated with.
All the CRMs I've ever used, it's always been, you had your client, the contacts with buyers and tenants, and then you had the properties.
Yeah.
Whereas now you've got the people, you've got the landlords and the vendors, where you're communicating directly with them. It doesn't matter how many properties they've got, you're communicating directly with them.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Or even, in something like life cycle, even just having something where you can say that this person's got 10 properties under management or whatever it might be, in order to personalise content a little bit more. Mm-hmm. I don't necessarily need to know, I don't need to put all 10 in as a market appraisal when we haven't done a market appraisal for him. Yeah, no, it's really interesting. Okay, so have you got any sort of plans bubbling up that you're happy to talk about around trying to maybe make anything else in the company smarter? I know you spoke about getting more into social media and that side of things. Like, is that the next big project then? Like, what are you sort of thinking of next?
Yeah, I think that's definitely the immediate ongoing kind of focus at the moment.
And why? Why social media? What is it you think that you're...
Because it's not something we're very good at, so we want to improve that anyway. But we know that going forward, it's something that we need to embrace more. It's going to become more prevalent with AI and social media and how people interact with agents. That you have to.
It's the know, like, and trust thing. I think we want to show glimpses of us as people, and we want to connect with everybody on sort of a personal level, but also showcase what it is that we do. And it is new to us, and we're not quite sure how we're going to get there, but we've certainly got more time to do it. Yeah. And I think also just with technology, we've actually not taken on a massive amount of new members of staff. I mean, we used to always bring in a member of staff to solve a problem, and I think what we've seen over the last 3 or 4 years, our conversation is we're not bringing anyone in until this is solid. And what's happened is it has got more solid, and now we're having more time where, like, James's role is changing, where he's now able to focus on clients. It's quite a recent thing because the systems are working in the background, and that's why we're hoping to improve our communication with our vendors, and that's the next big project that we want to delve into.
It's amazing when you get that sort of that realization as well, isn't it? Because I've lost count of the amount of times that I might have spoke to somebody about probably life cycle, something like life cycle, whatever it is, £18,000 a year, and someone's like, "You're joking? I could get a junior member of staff for that." And I'm thinking, so. Like, what's a junior member of staff? It doesn't even get close to what life cycle is going to do for you. But the mentality for most people, myself included in that for many years, is like, well, but surely I'd rather have a full-time person than this. It's like, okay, but let's hold on for a minute and just think about this. One scours en masse, one doesn't.
And so we're not quite there yet, but we're hoping the processes that we put in, utilising technology, is going to allow us to learn and grow and spend more time in that place. And
we absolutely will. Yeah,
and that's what we're hoping to do.
And we've given the guys we've got there. We've got a good team there now, young team but very good team, and we've given them more autonomy over certain parts of the business in terms of like the qualifying, the registration, the booking in appointment, the dealing with vendors, the booking in open days. Whereas before you're a bit like kind of I've got to make sure that I do that because I don't want anyone getting upset. And we've definitely put more faith in the guys, and it's allowed us to do more things like coming here today without worrying. We know exactly what's going on in the office.
Yeah,
if we need to, we can check it on our phone. We can see exactly what's going on.
We're not worried being here. We know that everything will still be there, and it will be recorded, and we'll know exactly where it is, and the guys know what they're doing.
It's a great story, but I know it's going to go in a fantastic direction from here as well, because I've been down that road, and I know loads of businesses that have been down that road, and it's that moment whereby the company starts to be able to move on from the founders feeling like the everyday work that they're having to do, it's critical that they do it.
Yeah.
Of course, you've got more passion about it than anybody else. That's just natural. And so, yes, it's probably quite likely you may well have a better conversion rate than somebody else, but that isn't scalable. And if you can bring yourself out of that and have some systems in place where it runs, then you get to suddenly start working on the really important stuff, and all of a sudden, like, the business can really start to grow.
It goes back to that guilt thing. You have to lose that guilt. Okay, I'm coming out of the business. It may not be been as well as maybe I could do it, or I think I could do it, but it's done good enough.
Absolutely, and like, you know, even for me now, I can go with Yusuf, my CTO, to Turkey to see our Turkish team, and we could spend the day. The sun would be out because we're in Turkey. We'd be sitting in a bar. We'd be having a conversation, and that is you can feel incredibly guilty about that, like you're just on a piss up. But like, we'll get some amazing shit done.
But the thing is also, when you go and meet someone, normally you are networking naturally and things happen by being there. So sometimes you don't go to things because you're so busy. When you go to things tend to happen anyway. So I think it's kind of
we have that all the time, don't we? We'll sit down and we'll start a conversation about something that we want to do, and it goes on all afternoon, and then we'll go, oh shit, it's 2:00, and then we're like, yeah, we've got some really good ideas going there now. It's important to get those wheels in motion with it.
Absolutely.
Another thing we've enjoyed as well is staff retention. We went through quite a lot of staff, I think, because of the volume of calls that were coming in, our expectation from the members of staff that wanted to do 5,000 different things.
Yeah.
It became kind of barking environment.
Yeah, well, there's no way of them winning that game, is there?
They couldn't win, and also they'd come from another agency, and it seems like the agents were going round the agents and then going back to the agent they come from, and it was kind of, we wanted to work a slightly different way, and we've managed to bring in younger apprentices that are now build through, and actually we're putting more expectations of them now, rather than sort of people going, I've had enough of this because I can't quite keep up with the way you used to work. We're seeing a shift in, we're not having to change our staff all the time, and so it's given us longevity, and actually we're analysing our staff now, saying can they go to that next position, where I think previously we're probably looking at going, like, are we keeping them happy, because like, I don't know if I'd work in that environment with that many calls coming through.
You haven't, when somebody comes in, whether they're an apprentice or they're 25 years old, and you're having to train them a certain way to do a certain amount of jobs, it's like, it's too many. Whereas now it's like, you just need to follow this process. It's really easy. Follow this process, and this is how we register somebody. It's fairly straightforward. But what we want to train you on is how to, identify opportunities. Like, this is how an estate agent should be thinking. When you're having it, if you hear this kind of thing, this is the sort of thing you should be saying.
Yeah.
And it's a much more relaxed environment now, where you're not stressing about making sure they know how to register and how to book an evaluation. It's all automated.
That's awesome. For any agents that are listening to this and they're thinking like, how the hell are you doing that? Like, I know you guys are both in the Estate Agency X group, so you're happy for people to reach out to you and make contact. Awesome. Well, I know that your journey is only going to go in one direction. I can tell you, it's like a crystal ball for me. I can see exactly where you are on the journey, and I can see what's coming next, and it's going to be phenomenal. Thanks very much for coming in.
No, pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this Estate Agency X podcast. Can you make sure that you're actually subscribed to this podcast channel if you liked the content? It helps us massively to get better guests, and it just helps us generally. So you might think you're subscribed, but just have a double check, whatever your podcast platform of preference is, that you're actually subscribed, and then that way we can continue to grow the channel and get better and better guests for you.